Hi everyone, I'm back again with part 2 of the Wildflower Folk by Christine Karron, and I'm colouring the Troll Girl. I'm using Albrecht Durer watercolour pencils to colour her, and I'll show you a little bit of how I would approach the background now. I'm thinking that one of my favourite colours to use in this Albrecht Durer set is the Payne's Grey. Instead of black, I like to use this as a sort of dark grey, but it's got a nice rich colour about it. And I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to attempt it anyway. I don't know whether it's actually going to work very well. And that is, I'm going to pair light yellow ochre with it. And what I'm planning to do is to wet the background first, and I'm not too fussy about the twigs just yet because I'm not sure how I'm going to colour them, but I'm thinking they're going to be dark. So I'm going to go in there with the Payne's Grey. This is paper that I've already wet, and you can see how it's sort of running into those wet areas. Probably needs to do that a bit more. So I'm actually picking up a little bit more extra colour off of the pencil with the brush this time, because I do want a darker colour than the nice subtle washes that I was doing on the face there. And I'm just going to use that under this border of stones or pebbles that Christine has drawn in here. And I don't want it to end suddenly at the twigs there. I'm sort of going around them, but in a way where it blends and isn't leaving a hard edge. And now I'm going to get quite wet. I've used a lot of water there. I don't know if you can see it dripping off of the pencil, and I'm going to just drop some of that colour in there too. And what I'm hoping it's going to do, and it is a little bit, where I've touched that into the Payne's Grey, the ochre is actually bleeding out and giving it a really unusual look. And I'm just going to encourage that to come down to her hair. And I'll do the same over here in this corner. I'll wet it all. And when you're working with your brush really wet, don't work over the page, because you will get splatters and splashes on your page where you don't want it. But do it to the side over your paper towel, and that way you've got less chance of having an accident that you have to try and deal with. Now sometimes I'm really blasé and I will still work over the image and I get splatters, and then I just have to work that into the picture, but we're not trying to get that look here today. We want it to look a little bit more polished, and we want it to be more intentional rather than accidental and having to sort it out. So now I've got that ochre again, and I'm just going to squeeze a bit of extra water onto it. And that's all bleeding into there nicely now. And try not to keep playing with it. I have noticed when I watch back what I've filmed that I'm messing with things a lot more on the camera than what I would in real life. And whether that's nerves or uncertainty, I'm not quite sure, but I need to stop doing that, because when I'm alone and I'm just colouring, I don't tend to do that quite so much. I'm a lot more random and, you know, sort of haphazard in real life. And now I'm just going to try and get this ochre to be quite wet again, and drop that into there. And of course you need to be careful if you're using really wet like this that it doesn't roll off the edge of the page. I'm just holding that paper down flat now, so if it bleeds back into the image and not past the border of the frame there. And down here I'm just going to lightly put in the ochre for starters. There's less room to play with, so it's going to be really hard to get any of those really runny, wet washes in such a fiddly area and not have an accident happen. So what I'm thinking is, I'm thinking that I need sort of a little bit of deepening in her hair down here, but I don't want the background dark. I want the background lighter and the hair darker. If I was keeping the hair light, I'd go for a dark background, so I'd go for that contrast there. That's what I'm thinking in my head, so I might actually bring a little bit of that into the shadow there. And the purple I noticed as it was drying wasn't really the purple that I was hoping for. So I'm going to tone that down a fraction with this Payne's Grey as well. Now you do need to be careful that you don't overlay too many colours or you'll end up with muddy colours. And this little bit of area of purple here, I wasn't really enjoying that very much, so I'm going to come back in with the burnt sienna and use the burnt sienna over there just to take some of that sort of purpley brightness out of it. And I'm also going to just very lightly strengthen up that strand of hair that's coming down as well. So that background looks like it might rarely have worked first time in a manner that I like, and I might not have to do too much else with that background. I'm just going to blend that bit of water over though, because that was a funny edge there. Yeah, quite like that. So that light yellow ochre might be very useful to bring in down here for this pendant, because it looks like it might be some sort of coin or medallion, and I'm sort of thinking gold. And what I like to do is try and think about leading the eye around the picture. So not just having the that strong light ochre up there, but to actually lead your eye around the picture so that you look at the other elements. And I'll also bring a little bit of the raw umber into that. And I'll also leave some areas with no paint to suggest the highlight on the shiny surface, because that is where you will get a white highlight. Now these, let's just check you're on screen. these pebbles down here have actually got a T-R-O-L-L for troll on there. So I'm thinking if that was a stone, that's going to be indented. So if the pebbles are lighter colour, then the indentation of those will be darker. So we'll just put that in there for starters. I've got a feeling I'm going to come back in there with perhaps some Payne's grey or a darker brown or something eventually. But just for starters, I'll get that done so I remember that it's actually there. I still have no idea what colour feather or these little bits of sort of binding ties in her hair. I don't know what colour I want to do them yet. And I might potentially use some metallic gold for her earrings. I think the tie around her neck there would be ideal in a brown of some description. So I'm just going to see if I can get a fine enough line with this brush. Otherwise I might need to get one of those fine brushes out or even come back with pencil. I was hoping to avoid pencil if I could and just show you purely what a whole picture done with Albrecht Durers can look like. That was my goal. So in my head I'm thinking, you know, paint it in a way that you're not going to need to bring those pencils in. And she's got some sort of teeth there hanging on her tie around her neck. So I'm thinking a warm grey. This is warm grey too. Really all I want to do is Christine's put some grey scale there. I'll just firm that up with some warm grey watercolour and leave the rest of the untouched paper. And what you can do with bone is when it's aged bone, I'm thinking that a little bit of cream, so that's like a really soft yellow. You can sort of use little touches of that, or you know, like a really pale raw umber or something like that, just to suggest that it's a bit dirty and grunged up and grimy, because she doesn't look like, you know, she's not just come out of a hotel, she's living wild. So she might not be the cleanest. And I'm going to go back to the walnut brown that I used for the tie. And now I'm just going to put some really slight shadows in. Clean the brush off and then come and just gently tease out that little bit of colour so that it's blended and it's not a hard line where I've stopped. Now you can do sort of dotting, dabbing motions as well, just to put touches of that colour in without getting too solid. And again, think about when you're looking for areas that will be shadowed or darker, they're underneath something or further back. And then those bits that are forward or closer to you are going to be lighter in colour and have the highlight on them. And if the lighting is really strong, then you're going to have a lighter highlight. If the lighting is not strong, you're going to have really subtle colour changes. You don't need to go for dark, deep shadows if it's a subtle light source. And this, the feeling of this image to me is very subtle, so I'm not going for huge, deep, strong shadows or highlights. I'm keeping it all really very soft. You could change the whole feel of the piece by how you determine your light source. You can make it sort of sinister and moody if you decide to make it like there's a really strong light source with sort of deep shadows, and you could make it look, you know, like the shadows are scary. You could make the whole picture deeper in tone so that it just looks murkier and more sinister. And that's sort of entirely up to you to determine how you want to approach that. I don't have all the answers for that, so what I do is when I'm sort of thinking that way and I don't know how to do it, I'll go to Google again and just look at examples. Pinterest is another one that's really helpful for looking at images for ideas, and you know, like it will give you some ideas of what colours to use. And I think I've said to you before that if you squint your eyes at a picture or squint your eyes at something, you can sort of determine those changes in light and shade a little bit easier than when you're looking at something full on. So now I'm going to have a think about the pebbles. I think that I'm going to do them in the warm grey. So I've gone back to warm grey 2. And where Christine's done the grey shade, I'm just going over that and a little bit further into the pebble and leaving the white area that she hasn't got any grey scale on for this just at this moment in time, until I decide how to do the rest of them. But my thought is that I'm going to bring in a combination of the brown ochre and the yellow ochre into those pebbles, and I'm just dotting that into some of the grey, and I'm preserving the light area of the paper again. Now, if you I don't feel like putting that warm grey on every pebble, I'll just randomly pick ones out and just do it over the grey scale. And I'm not putting a lot of thought into this. Like, what I'm doing is following her shading, and the shading is sort of around the bottom bottom part of the stone. She's got the highlight of the stone is more sort of in that centre section there on all the stones. So if you don't have any grayscale to follow, just think about the shape of the stone. If it's rounded, then this dark colour is going to be at the sort of heaviest, lowest part of the stone, and the highlight will be on the uppermost, highest part of the stone. And that's how I would approach doing the pebbles. And I'm just using that all on top of each other and letting the colour blend, because I don't want it uniform. Like you don't see uniform, you do see unicorns. You don't see unicorn, oh I said it again, uniform markings on pebbles and stones and colour. They're all different, and so you want to make this random, and you don't want to try and replicate the same effect on every single stone, or that would just look unnatural and strange. So that's how I would go about doing the pebbles. And I might even bring in, on just some of them, not all of them, I'm bringing in the walnut brown. And I'm not going for really blended, but I also don't want obvious hard lines that look unnatural. Think about what you see in real life, and think about, you know, how you see those things, and try and replicate it with marks and dots and dashes. But we don't normally see rigid hard lines on these sorts of river pebbles. So what I'm doing is I'm not wanting to replicate real life, and I'm not going for photorealism, but what I'm going for is an illustration that is believable and recognisable for what it is. And I'm using little illustrative touches to develop that image, but I'm not trying to sort of make it look like these are real pebbles on the page. But I'm also sort of trying to get it to be believable that yes, that is pebbles there. That's what I'm trying to represent. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, I don't have a lot of grey up in this corner, so time to put the brown away and just get the grey going again. Get some grey mixed in there. And the other colour that I might just bring in a few places as well is the Payne's Grey. And this is where I get to the point where I can fiddle a little bit too much and overdo something. So this is getting really close to that sort of point where you need to take the step back and a time away from it, and just come back with fresh eyes, because you can sort of fiddle too much. Now that's all very much one sort of tone and colour, and I'm going to go for something different. Because she's got the green eyes, I'm going to bring a green tie in, I think. And I'm going to go for quite a strong green, and I think this one is a leaf green, and I've decided that I'm going to do that because the only other green on the page was her eyes. So that's leaf green. And I don't know if you can hear that, but the rain is actually coming down now, which is very nice. So pine green, which is what I used on the edge of her eyes up there, is just going to go into those sort of more shadowy areas. And that's just gives it, you know, like you can see it, it stands out from the background a little bit, but it's not, you know, it's not the centre of the page, is it? You'd really rather look at her eyes than those. But once you've looked at it, your eyes are going to go circle around that. And I think I'm going to keep the feather white. So where there's a little bit of grayscale here, I'm just using the warm grey to suggest a bit of a shadow in there. And I'm also going to put a touch of the yellow ochre just in there. And a little bit of walnut brown back down there. It might have come from, you know, something like a owl or some other bird. And possibly even a little touch of the Payne's grey. And I'm going to do a little touch of that behind there and in there. In those shadows. And a little bit of the walnut brown, just a little bit extra brown in her eyebrow to darken that up a little bit. And I'm going to use a little bit of the walnut brown on the twig. Now the twig isn't going to reflect light so much, I'm thinking. So it can be a more solid colour rather than the nice, you know, subtle washes that we've used for skin. Just move that book a little bit while I do this. Now I'm using this over the book because I'm not slopping lots of water around and I shouldn't get any drips. In fact, I'll put that down just in case, but the pencil tips are very dry and they're only just slightly damp where I'm touching the brush to them, so I'm not at risk of this dripping onto my page. But when I did that wet in wet technique with lots of water, I did it off to the side there, just to be careful that that didn't drip all over her face. But if you're nervous, just hold your pencil over a piece of paper towel or off to the side. because there's nothing worse than getting a drip right in the middle of this pretty girl's face. So the solidness and saturated nature of the colour on the twig is suggesting that that's a much more solid, immovable object than what her hair is. I've treated her hair very lightly, so it looks like it's something that will move and isn't static, isn't going to stay in place. Now I'm still not completely covering up Christine's lines. I am still suggesting some of her drawing showing underneath. Just going to do this top corner here, because I don't really want it to look like an unnatural man-made sort of lump of brown stuff there. So I'm letting that sort of organic drawing that Christine is so good at, her line work is still sort of showing through there. I'm not a fan of covering up the lines in my colouring books, because it is a colouring book and I'm not pretending that it isn't a colouring book. And I know some people do like to cover the lines up, and that's all good. And I see it done really well sometimes, it's just fabulous, but that isn't something that I'm good at. Whenever I've tried it, I just make it look really awful. And I actually don't mind it showing, so especially books like this, because the line work is just like this is Christine's sketchbook. It's not heavy black lines. The texture and quality of the line work makes it very much hand-drawn looking. And so I don't see there's a need to cover any of that up either. It's like we're colouring in her sketchbook. Okay, so the only thing left to do is to put some gold on her earrings, I think, and work out what to do with this strap work. And it is very fine, so I'm thinking, just excuse me reaching across here. I'm thinking I need the finest of fine brushes that you're probably not even going to see on the camera. My fine brushes are so old now, they're starting to get frayed. I've got a little pot of water here. And it's the teeniest, tiniest little brush. And I'm just going to really lightly paint in. It's like a leather cord or leather lace. You know, I quite often just dab things onto my hand like that as well, and It always reminds me of a teacher that I had for life drawing, and she was so funny. By the end of a life drawing class, she'd have charcoal all over her face, and we'd have to tell her that she had it on her face because she used to go out after work to the shop or somewhere on the way home with charcoal smudges all over her nose or on her face, because she'd get so engrossed in what she was drawing, and then, you know, wipe her face or scratch her face or something if it was itchy, and then forget about it and just go trotting out the door before anyone could tell her. And she said that she used to get some really strange looks when she'd stop at the grocery store on the way home, and it, you know, took a while to dawn on her that that's why they were looking at her odd. It's because she'd have all these black smears all over her face. She was really a fun character, and she has passed away now, sadly, but her enthusiasm for teaching and for art was so infectious, and she was a little bit of a hard taskmaster. If you submitted a assignment, especially written assignments, you'd get it back with all red marks all over it where she'd made all the corrections and had hints for how you could rewrite it better. And you know, it used to be so frustrating, but in the end we all got really fabulous results because her persistence in in you know, pushing us to that little bit extra all the time, you know, paid off when we got great exam results. Or for example, I won these pencils when I was studying her life drawing class, and then I went to higher studies, and I had to submit portfolio of work at the end of the year to be assessed for my grade. And I almost got the top grade, and she actually argued with the moderators that she felt that they had underscored my work. But sorry, that frog is still around. But some of our work got selected to go into an exhibition at the end of the year. And that's what had happened. My work got selected to go in. Excuse me. And I won one of the categories, which was the prize was this set of lovely Albrecht Durer watercolour pencils. So, and that was 20 odd years ago. Yeah, it would have to be. My son was only really young then, and he's nearly 30 now. So I cherish these pencils, and I think that's why I don't always reach for them, because I kind of put them on a bit of a pedestal and cherish them. But that is so silly, because, you know, these things are made to be used and not just admired. But it proves that pencils don't go off, and quality pencils like this go a long way. And when it comes to art materials, some things are worth paying for. I do persevere with the cheaper markers and some of the cheaper coloured pencils, because light fastness isn't a consideration for me. However, there is the factor of enjoyment and ease of use that you can't put a value on. And if you're going to cut corners and have cheap materials just because you don't want to spend money on it, and have a miserable time, then you're selling yourself short. If you have cheap materials but you use them and you get enjoyment out of them, like I do with my markers, I get great enjoyment out of them and I don't struggle with them, and they adequately suit all my needs and the purpose that I'm doing, using them. But if I had the money to spare, then it would be lovely to have Copics or one of the top brands, and it might make it a little bit easier for me to use them. But certainly with something like this, with the watercolour pencils and even coloured pencils to a certain extent, if you're struggling with the cheap ones and you can afford an expensive set, get a few open stock to start. Open stock just to try whether you like that particular pencil brand, and then save up for some good ones, because if that increases your value, your enjoyment in your hobby, then it's worth every cent or dime or whatever. Every bit of money that you spend on it is worth it if it increases your enjoyment. So that's my overriding factor when I'm buying things. That if I can get enjoyment out of a cheaper product, then I'll go for that, because I don't work outside of the home, and so I do feel a little bit guilty spending too much money on my hobby. But if I can, something like this, for example, and I do have polychromos as well, for ease of use and the enjoyment factor of using them, they're worth every penny. So I hope that makes sense. I know it's a bit of a ramble, but yeah, I feel really strongly about it. I mean, I push and try to get the best out of all the cheaper products that I have, and I've had some great results with cheaper products. But when they're cheap and nasty and don't do what I want, and they ruin my enjoyment, then I get rid. My granddaughter gets them, or the charity shop gets them, somebody gets them. I've given a whole heap of stuff away to the Art Society before. Okay, and I think I might just put a little tiny touch more of green into her eyes. And I don't have my gold metallic pen nearby, so I'm just going to finish up, and you'll have to imagine what they look like, or come visit me on Instagram at Spare Room Studio on Instagram, and you'll see the completed page. So that's how she's looking, and the pebbles are looking. So that's how I would approach painting a portrait with Albrecht Durer watercolour pencils by Faber-Castell. And I hope you've enjoyed watching it. I really do appreciate you following along. And now that I've looked at it, I'm not that happy with this area, so I'm going to put some more yellow on there. So let's just hang on a minute. We'll put a little bit more dark Naples ochre just on there, because it was just a little bit too light, I think. Yeah, it's starting to look better. It didn't need much, and a little tiny fraction in the eyes there. Okay, so that's the Troll Girl from, oops, sorry about that, by Christine Karron in Wildflower Folk. And that is how she looks. Okay, thanks for joining me again for this one, and I will see you really soon. Bye now.